A Little in Love, Disc 3.
The Patron Minette. Maman loved the brooch. She clasped it to her tattered bodice, saying, "Oh, see how pretty! Do I look like a lady?" But like everything, we sold it in the end. Azelma found buttons, firewood, a fur-lined glove and fistfuls of coins. "Paris," she cried, "is wonderful." I smiled because maybe she was the same as me. Maybe she'd seen its beautiful parts too. But she added, "People are so busy with politics or fashion or the guillotine that they don't see me robbing them. Stupid lot." So no, we weren't the same. She liked what I didn't, dark deeds and alleyways. She liked Babet's stories about pulling teeth from men as they slept, and she drank his gin, and one day she said, "This house isn't so bad after all. Maybe we can stay here." But I'd seen that eye peeping through the hole in our bedroom wall again and again, and there were spiders as big as my hand, and I wanted to leave the house more than ever before. That was a very hard winter. It snowed. Like babies, we pressed ourselves to Maman in bed for extra warmth. Papa stayed downstairs playing dominoes with men I didn't know. They smoked and swore and made plans. "Who are they?" I whispered. "They're so loud." "The Patron Minette," said Azelma. "Haven't you heard of them? They're in the house a lot, but then you're probably too busy daydreaming by the Seine." I bristled. "I don't daydream by the Seine." "You do. Montparnasse has seen you." "Who?" "One of Babet's friends and Papa's. They are the best thieves in all of Paris. So clever and exciting. You should meet them, Eponine." I didn't like the sound of them at all. But I did meet them before very long. One night when I was alone in the bedroom. The others were downstairs, but I wanted to climb into bed and dream of being fur-dressed and beautiful. Then Babet opened the bedroom door. "The fire's burning bright downstairs. Join us." "I'm fine." "You're blue. You're shivering with cold. Don't be foolish, Eponine. Come down to the fire." He smiled, showing his gums. "I promise I won't bite." That's how I met them, the Patron Minette, by the fire, playing dominoes. There were 4 of them, including Babet. My parents and Azelma were there too. That slimy, tooth-pulling man showed me a space near the fire with a sweep of his hand, as if he was offering me gold. "Here, mademoiselle, warm your pretty hands." One of the men was like a monster. So big he had to stoop to fit into the room. His forearms were wider than my whole body. His name was Guillemot, and he grunted a lot. There was a man in the corner who I couldn't really see because his face was in shadow. "That's Claxou," said Babet. "He won't speak. He lets his fists and blades speak for him." The 3rd man was called Montparnasse. He wasn't like the others because he was neat and clean-shaven. He was young, 20, no more. He wore a pomade in his hair and a cravat at his neck, and a flower bloomed in his buttonhole, which made me think, a flower? In winter? Azelma was looking at him too. The men cackled and passed a flagon of wine between them. "All this unrest must help," Papa said. "Everyone hating the king and fighting for La République. People are distracted. Easier to steal from." Montparnasse replied, "It's true. The gendarmes have far more to worry about than a thief or two." I sat by the fire and said nothing. I just thought about Gavroche and hoped he was warm and safe. Maybe he was playing in the snow, like children do. I hoped so. When I looked up, I saw Montparnasse was watching me. He didn't blink. He just half smiled and licked his lips as a dog might before it eats its meat. They boasted all night long. Papa talked of the bishop's face as he'd stabbed him with the bone-handled knife. Gueulemer held out his hand and said, "I've strangled too many people to count. See how strong these hands are." As for Babet, he told stories of pulling teeth. "There's a man near Boulogne who collects them and hangs them on a string around his neck. I've pulled the teeth of pretty ladies too, although they're less pretty once I've finished with them." This made me feel my own teeth with my tongue, as if checking they were still there. Montparnasse's voice was so soft the room fell quiet when he spoke. "Do you know Saint-Saëns?" "Saint-Saëns?" Azelma shook her head. "No, I don't. Who's he? Will you tell me, Montparnasse?" "He's the executioner. He's a man who works the blade, and he gets to keep the silver crosses or gold rings that the jabbering fools bring out with them. Once the blade drops, he prizes these treasures out of their still warm hands. Well, I found where Saint-Saëns drinks at night." Azelma gasped. "You took the silver crosses from him when he was drunk?" "I did. I don't think it's stealing if I'm taking what was already stolen. Do you?" The Patron Minette ruled the Paris underworld. They knew how long to hold a man's head under water. They'd dig up a freshly dead body in Père Lachaise cemetery just in case it still wore a wedding ring. They used sewers to escape through or hide in, and as I listened, I felt ashamed and angry. I ached for something else, for something good. I thought suddenly of Cosette and the gentle face of the yellow-coated man. Their hearts were the opposite of the black heart sitting by this fire. Where were they? "I want more than this," I thought. Just like I'd wanted more than a life in Montfermeil. I want to get out of here. I stole and stole. There was no other way to get enough money to leave the house on Rue de la Charcuterie. So I hurried through Les Halles, taking every shiny thing. I took pocket watches and eyeglasses and candlesticks with their candles still in, and stirrups from saddles and a pair of lambskin gloves. I whipped a walking cane away from a man, took it back to Maman to replace her rickety branch. More. Steal more. I didn't even do good deeds as I went. I didn't have time to, for I just wanted to be far, far away from Babet's brown teeth, the damp mattress and the lice, and the eye that peered through that hole in the wall. The key. A blizzarding night. Hard to steal in blizzards because most people are indoors, and my hands were too numb to do much. I stumbled through the snowy streets. I was shivering and blue, but it was better than sitting by Babet's fire. Here, at least, I could daydream. Perhaps I will be rescued. Maybe a handsome man will find me, say, "Why is such a beauty in rags and tatters? Come with me." Such little dreams kept me warm inside. As I crept along the Rue du Puy-l'Ermite, I saw something, bronze-coloured, half hidden by snow. I bent down. A key. It was big and heavy. What might it be worth, And could it be melted down? Was there gold in it? I ran back to the Rue de la Charcuterie thinking, this will get us out of there. We'll be able to live in our own house because of this key. Maman leaned on her new walking stick and said, "Let me see." "Do you think it might be gold, Maman?" "It's heavy for certain." She weighed it in her hand. Papa and Babet came with their beady eyes and said, "A key?" "Eponine found it. I don't think it's gold, but it might be worth something. Feel how heavy it is." Papa smiled. "Never mind selling it. Where did you find it?" I said, "Rue de Puy-l'Ermite." "Where on the Rue de Puy-l'Ermite?" "Near the lamp-posts that the dogs use." "And did anyone see you pick it up?" "No, Papa. It was snowing and no one was out except me." "And is it still snowing?" "Yes, very hard." I didn't understand his questions. "Why, Papa? Why must it be snowing?" He started to cackle. "Because what do keys open, Eponine? Doors? I'm going to try all the doors on Rue de Puy-l'Ermite with it until a door opens and lets us in. And if it's snowing?" "It will cover our tracks," sang Azelma. "People will stay inside and no one will follow us or know it was us." They all came forwards at that moment. Gueulemer, Claquesous, and Montparnasse stepped into the candlelight like ghosts. "This sounds like a wonderful plan," Maman said. "It does," said Babet. "What are we waiting for?" I cried that night. I hadn't meant for a home to be burgled, for a sleeping person to be robbed of all they had in the whole wide world. I just thought Papa could sell the key for its metal, that's all. I whispered, "Don't let anyone die, please." It had been my fault. They all came back at dawn. Under their snowy coats and in their pockets, and carried between them they had tables, paintings, the poker for the fire, a carriage clock and shiny knobs from the sleeper's bed. In a polished wooden box they'd found banknotes and jewels. Also a letter in a woman's hand in which she had written, "All I ever think about is you." "A letter? No value in that," said my papa. He threw the note on the fire and I watched it burn. I felt wretched, tired and lonely. The others drank and cackled, but I stayed in the bedroom, hugging my knees. Downstairs I heard Papa say, "Eponine? Oh, she's too soft and foolish. But she needn't be sad. I left the key in the door for him. So at least he has something." And their laughter shook the whole house. I hated that key. It meant that somewhere in Paris a man lost all that mattered to him on a snowy night. He lost money and paintings, but a love letter too, and maybe that letter was the greatest loss of all. Papa sold everything, the bed knobs, the jewels. "But we'll keep the table," said Maman. "We'll need it in our new home." "New home?" "We've got enough money now, Eponine. That key hasn't just opened a crooked old door on the Rue de Puy-l'Ermite. It'll open the door to our new home too." I gasped. "Really? No Babet and no Montparnasse?" "No, just us," said Maman. The Gorbeau Tenement. Love. It's almost the smallest word I know. If it was an object, I might drop it or forget it because it's so tiny. But it's not a small feeling, even though it grows from a moment as small as an apple pip. In my daydreams, I found love in the smart parts of Paris, where the ladies wore ermine and music played. I never thought I'd find it in the grey and draughty stairwell of the Gorbeau tenement, but I did. Our new home was south of the river. We trudged through the snow towards it, over the Seine, past the old horse market, and beyond the Rue de Petit Banquet, where the tannery was. "Where are we going, Papa?" asked Azelma, clutching her dress at the neck for warmth. "I'd liked it at Babet's. Why couldn't we stay there?" "We're going to a place that Claquesous told me about." "Claquesous speaks," said Maman dryly. This was the poorest part of Paris, where the homeless huddled by damp fires and where the slaughterhouse was. "Where are we?" "Salpêtrière." Stunted trees, crumbling walls. It's like the end of the world, I thought. There was a long black building ahead of us. "There," said Papa. "That's our new home." The Gorbeau tenement had row upon row of windows that peered out like eyes. A single door stood, mouth-like. I thought it looked like a skull. "The rent's cheap," Papa said. "It'll do." The landlady was called Madame Bourgon. I don't think she'd ever brushed her hair because it was knots all over. She got the slow-moving eyes of someone who drank too much. "Yes?" "You've got a room to rent?" She eyed us. "There are 4 of you?" "4. One room is 4 sous a week. A sou for each person." Maman scoffed. "4? These 2 are children. They are not yet in their teens. Why should they be a sou each, as we are?" This was as clear a lie as if she had said it was summer outside. The landlady cackled. "These 2? Ha! Look at their faces. Those aren't children's faces, and they've got the shapes of women, and—" She brought out a finger, pointed. "If you think I can be fooled by a liar, you're a fool yourself. Understand?" So it was 4 sous and no less. When asked for our name, Papa said Jondrette. "Jondrette?" I whispered to Azelma. "Why Jondrette?" "Everybody knows the name Thénardier," she replied. "After the murdered bishop. It's a wanted name in France, and that old bat," she meant Madame Bourgon, "wouldn't rent her room to us if she knew who we really were." It was an echoing, draughty place. There were lots of stairs too, because the corridors were so long that there were stairwells at each end of them. Most of the rooms were empty, but some were rented by people who were as thin and poor as us. Our room was on the 2nd floor. There wasn't much in it, just a single chair and 2 rickety beds. It had a window, but it was so dirty I couldn't really see through it. There was a small hearth for cooking, a bucket for private doings. "Well," said Maman, "what do you think?" I didn't know what to say. At least it was better than the house on the Rue de la Charcuterie. I hoped I might be able to stop stealing now. But no, Maman ordered it. "How else are we going to eat? Keep stealing." "But it's so cold outside." "Then steal some firewood to warm yourself afterwards. Tusk." I crept through Salpêtrière looking. There was nothing to steal. Even the trees looked poor because their branches had been snapped off for fuel. In the graveyard, people were sheltering against the gravestones, and they looked as dead as the people in the ground. Azelma managed to catch a crow. She carried it back to the Gorbeau, where it flapped and screeched until Papa wrung its neck. It tasted nasty, but it was food. Its scattered soot-black feathers never really left our room. "There's nothing to steal, Maman. People are poorer than we are." "Try harder." Madame Bourgon saw all of this. She spied us as we came and went, said, "Always out walking, aren't you?" From this I knew she was nosy, and that if I ever wanted to know something, she'd be the one to ask. I walked further and further into Paris. Christmas was coming closer. It meant the streets looked more colourful and there was music everywhere. On the Rue de Rivoli, people wore fur and long woolen coats, and the lanterns dazzled me. But I also thought of the shivering folk in the graveyard in Salpêtrière. It didn't seem fair to have rich and poor side by side. One late afternoon, I came to a square called the Place Michel. I stopped because it looked so pretty, with candles in its windows. Snow had started falling again. The nearby clock tower struck 7 times. At the side of the Place Michel was a café. Its windows were steamy from all the people inside it, and so I hurried to it, hoping that it might warm me a little. "Café Musin," said the sign. I pressed my face against its foggy glass. Inside was a roaring fire and dozens of young men, drinking and talking so loudly that I could hear them, even though the door was closed. "Vive la République!" cried one with golden curls. They cheered, and another boy with reddish hair raised his glass, saying, a toast to la marque." They all stood, glasses high in the air. La marque. A boy with half-moon spectacles began to sing, stamping his feet. I stepped away from the window. Such passion. I'd seen it in their pink cheeks and flashing eyes, and I'd heard it in the way they spoke. What were they talking about? I didn't know much, but I knew that the king was hated and most people wanted him gone. Those men wished for a better life, just like I did. I was just one little person in a world of millions, but I still mattered. I had hopes and dreams like them. The thought kept me warm as I hurried home. The chestnut seller. Papa was angry. "Nothing? You've been out all day and you've come back with nothing?" He kicked the wall. "At least your sister brings crows and rats." "Rats?" "It's food, and it's more than you're bringing us." "She's too busy dreaming," muttered Maman, disappointed in me. With nothing to steal, I had to try something else. And I had a thought. I'll get a job. It was nearly Christmas after all, and I was sure there would be at least one shopkeeper in Paris who might need a little help. So I tied my hair back with string and scrubbed the stains from my skirt, and I knocked on dozens of doors: butchers, grocers, vintners, taverners, fishmongers, the coffin makers who liked the word guillotine, the confectioner on Rue d'Estar, whose window was one of the prettiest things I'd seen in all my life. The confectioner saw me looking through his window. "Hey," he said, "what do you want? Get away from there." I jumped. "Monsieur, I'm just looking for a little work. Maybe I could do something useful for you, in return for a coin or two." He did a single, hard laugh. "You?" "Please, monsieur, I'm a hard worker and—" "Look at you. Grime on your hands and holes in your clothes. There are folk in the ground at Père Lachaise who have more flesh on their bones. Employ you? I wouldn't even serve you. Move on or I'll make you." And he raised his fist. He was the worst of them. His shop was full of sweetness, but the rest of him was sour. But others were not that different. The butcher folded his arms. "No work here." "Not even to sweep the floors?" even if it's just for one day. No work. When I tried one vintner, maybe I could move barrels, he narrowed his eyes and said, "Are you a royalist, supporting the king? Or are you after a republic, like so many are?" I wasn't sure. What had they said at the Café Musin? I mumbled, "I think Lamarck will save us." "Then you're a traitor," he shouted, "as well as a grubby little wretch. Now shoo before I set my dog on you." For 3 days, I tried so hard to live a proper life, but I was jeered at and pushed away, and I didn't get any food to take back to the Gorbeau tenement. I was hungry and cold. Then I smelt something. What was it? It was sweet and hot, and my belly growled at it. On the corner of Rue Bontoise and the Passage des Patriarches, there was a metal drum. Inside this drum, I saw the reddish glow of coals. A man stood near it, saw me. "Yes?" My voice was tiny. "May I stand here a while, just for warmth?" He was roasting chestnuts. They were darkening and splitting to show their flesh. I'd have given so much to taste just one of them. I could barely find the strength of heart to speak to him, but I said, "Monsieur, forgive me. I don't have a single coin on me, but I would love to have one of your chestnuts. Are there any errands I could do for you? Any pots that may need cleaning?" He tilted his head. "A single chestnut? Child, I can spare you a single chestnut. Come closer." He lifted a nut from his fire and held it out. I was shocked. No curses from him. No, "Get away from here." Really? For free? When he placed it in my hand, it was almost too hot for me to hold, but I loved how it felt. Warmth. At last. He watched me as I ate. His eyes had a shine to them. "Mademoiselle," he whispered, "look how thin you are." I looked. My elbows and knees were the largest part of my limbs. I looked as if I could be snapped like a twig. "How do you live?" I wondered how to answer. Then I thought, be honest with this good man. And so, with the taste of chestnut on my tongue, I said, "I've tried for work, monsieur, but no one will give me any. I beg a little, but I steal most of all. I hate to do it, I really do, but if we don't steal, we starve." The chestnut seller listened. I thought he might call me a name like thief or scoundrel and tell me to clear off, but he didn't. He just said, "You poor thing. There are many like you, I know. This city. We thought the revolution would lead to a better life, but what's changed? Come closer still. Warm yourself. And here." He took a twist of paper, filled it with many chestnuts, 5, 6, 7 of them. "I've no job to give you, and not much money of my own, but you're not much older than my son, and far thinner. If I can ever help you, child, I'll try to." I took the chestnuts, wordless. 7 of them? For nothing? "A gift," he said. "A gift?" "It's Christmas Eve, after all." I felt like weeping. The vintner and confectioner had been so cruel, but this man was so kind. The bells of Notre Dame pealed across the Seine. I remembered another Christmas Eve, many years before. The yellow-coated man. His eyes had been like the chestnut man's eyes, sad and very gentle. Suddenly my own eyes brimmed, and Notre Dame blurred, and I felt so thankful for these chestnuts and for such good people. I whispered, "Thank you," as I ran home under the nighttime sky. My family gobbled the chestnuts up. "You stole them?" said Maman with her mouth full. "Yes," I lied. It just seemed better to, and as I watched them eat, I thought, there is still good in the world. The men in the Café Musin had believed it, and the chestnut seller had proved it. The next morning I said Merry Christmas to everyone I'd met and liked in my life. Cosette, Valjean, little Gavroche, the Lefebvres, Widow Amandine, the black cat in Montfermeil. Merry Christmas to the stars. Merry Christmas to old Auguste and his peaches. Merry Christmas to the upturned boat that lay on a riverbed these days, but might be a home, or so I hoped, to fish and eels, and unseen river things. Written words and spoken words. Christmas passed. The year was 1831. The man called Lamarck was being talked of everywhere. Maybe this will be the year that he kicks the king off the throne, do you think? It wasn't snowing now, but it was too cold for the fallen snow to melt, so it just lay there getting dirty. There were yellow spots where dogs had been. "I hate this weather," said Azelma. "It makes everything harder." I was tired of it too, but I could imagine Cosette in it. No sackcloth anymore. She would be wearing goatskin boots and a velvet cape, and maybe a white fur muff like the one I used to have. Now it was me wearing rags. "A new year," declared Papa, "needs a new plan. And I've got one." His eyes flashed excitedly. "We shall write letters." "Letters? What?" Maman didn't understand either. "To the rich, Josephine. I'll write begging letters, the best that have ever been written. I'll say my children are dying and we need money to save them. Or I'll say I'm a great artist in need of coins in order to finish my greatest piece, which I will dedicate to my benefactor, of course. Or I'll say we're good religious people who will bless any man who spares a franc or two." Maman started to smile. She liked this idea. "Or give the letter to those who love Lamarck, saying that we are collecting money for his campaign." "Or," chirped Azelma, "that we wish to help the poor, fatherless urchins of this city and need pennies to do so." Yes, très bien, Azelma." I tilted my head. "So, tell lies?" Maman snapped. "Of course we'll tell lies. Don't be so prissy. There's no use in being kind, remember? Kindness gets you nowhere in this world." So Papa wrote letters, and Azelma and I took those letters out into the richer parts of Paris, like the Rue de Rivoli and Boulevard Saint-Germain. "Look poor and pitiful," Papa hissed, so we dirtied our faces and widened our eyes. Near Saint-Sulpice, Azelma said, "That gentleman, let's try him. Look how well groomed his whiskers are. He must have money. Also, he wears a crucifix, so he is godly." I watched my sister as she scuttled to him and tugged his sleeves. He read the letter she gave him. She even pretended to cry very daintily, and I saw the whiskered man reach into his coat. "Easy," she sang afterwards, jangling with coins. "Your turn, Eponine. You got the letters?" "Yes." "Then I'll see you later, back at the Gorbeau." Maybe I was still warm from the fiery hearts in the Café Musin, or by the chestnut seller's kindness, but I didn't want to lie or dupe or steal. Instead, I went to the Rue de Rivoli, tucked myself against some railings, and just watched them all toing and froing. I saw how a grand dame descended from her carriage holding the coachman's wrist with her elegant, white-gloved hand. Beauty. Love. Two things I didn't have. I closed my eyes, wanting them. Anything could happen. That's how it felt in Paris. At that very moment, someone touched me. A hand took hold of my shoulder. My eyes sprang open because I thought, "It is a gendarme. He knows about these letters." And I screeched, "Get off!" and tried to free myself. "Hey, shush now." It was a man's voice, trying to calm me. "Don't fight, Eponine." He knew me. I turned round, saw the flower in the buttonhole and the slicked dark hair. Montparnasse. He came closer. "Don't say it too loudly. I'm a wanted man." I'd have preferred a gendarme to him. I pushed his hand away. "For thieving and murdering?" "You disapprove. I think you do. You've got piercing eyes, Eponine. And yet I know what you're doing here on the Rue de Rivoli. Those letters in your pocket. You and your sister are tracking these well-dressed folk into parting with their pennies, aren't you? Which means you're no better than me." I resented this. "I am better than you. I've never murdered and I never would." "Ah, I said the same thing once. But life is hard and people change. It becomes easier, Eponine. If they're very old, then what harm have you done? They'd have died soon anyway." I wished he wasn't standing there. He was like a shadow with a musky smell, strong hands and a knife in his belt. I felt tired suddenly. "Don't you wish for better?" "Better? Of course. It's because I wish for better that I steal at all." "You don't understand me, Montparnasse. I don't mean richer, I mean—" I paused. How could I explain it? "Don't you ever want to live a kinder life?" I didn't think it was a hard question, but he flinched at it like it was an unknown bug flying at him. "Kinder? What? Ha! How can you be a Thénardier? Do you know what your father would do if he heard such talk from his daughter's mouth?" "Zelma is the better thief," I said quietly. "They say I'm too soft." "I'm sure they're right. Kindness is a foolish word." "That's what Maman says too." I felt sour then. All these lanterns and carriages and soft rabbit fur and men with top hats and romance. Montparnasse was ruining all of it. All I wanted was to believe in better, just a bit. A little light and love and hope. I wanted to shake Montparnasse, to shout out that his heart might be missing, but mine was still beating, and my conscience was beating too, and I wouldn't let him make me feel hollow and useless and sad. How could he ever be happy, murdering? But I didn't do or say any of these things. I just whispered, "There are other ways to live." "Other ways?" "Moral ways. Other people survive without thieving, so why can't we?" He laughed so loudly that people looked over. "Moral? Look around you, Eponine. How much morality do you see here? This lot have got their wealth from beating their servants and from their wicked business deals, and most won't give a single sou to the poor. I promise you that. See the shopkeepers? They'll take any coin they can, selling meat that's fly-blown or fruit that's bruised. They don't care. As for the priests, they talk about helping the poor, but have you seen the wealth they've got in their churches? The silver and gold?" He tutted, shook his head. "If you think this is a good world, you're mistaken. Being kind won't make a single bit of difference. It'll only make you poorer still." I felt like telling him he was so wrong, that there were good people in the world, and their goodness could fill a room. There was a better way, because I'd seen it in Montfermeil all those years ago. In a softer voice, he said, "You believe in love, too, I shouldn't wonder." I felt like crying then. "Yes," I answered. "I believe in it." His smile was like a cat's smile to a mouse. Love? It's a myth. But there's money in it. You're not ugly, Eponine. You could sell a kiss or two. My eyes brimmed with tears. I was done with him. I ran away, over the river, and on towards Salpêtrière. I cried as I went. I can't steal. I can't find a job. I can't find love or be beautiful. There's no point in anything. I ran all the way home and slipped on ice. My hands and knees were bleeding. I'd never felt so hopeless or alone. Who could have imagined that this would be the moment? I pushed open the door. I ran up the stairs without looking, and I ran straight into someone. A boy. No one I knew. He was walking down the stairs as I was running up them. He held my shoulders gently to stop me crashing into him and looked right into my eyes. "Excusez-moi, mademoiselle." Room 4. His hair was thick and dark, and he was brown-eyed like me, but his were darker, a sort of golden brown. They had little flecks in them, as if sunshine had been stirred in. Freckles on his nose, a dimple in his left cheek as he smiled at me. He didn't belong in the Gorbeau tenement at all. At all. He let go of my shoulders. "You're crying," he said, frowning then. "Are you all right?" I wasn't, but I couldn't say so. I just nodded. "Are you sure? I can't help you?" I managed, "No, monsieur. Merci." He gave a second smile, slipped past me, and made his way downstairs. I stood very still. I just looked at the space where he'd been. That night I couldn't sleep. He couldn't live in the Gorbeau. He must be a visitor. I smiled at the stars through the window and thought, please let him visit again. In the morning, I went to Madame Bourgon. When she opened her door, she raised an eyebrow at me. "Ah, the elder Jondrette girl. What are you bothering me for?" "Madame, I'm seeking a person who was here yesterday. A young gentleman. I think he's a visitor. He left a button and I've got to return it." A button? She wasn't a fool. She knew that the Jondrettes would snatch a button and sell it, not give it back. "Yes, a button. He was older than me, 20 maybe. He wore a dark wool coat and his hair was a sort of chestnut colour." Her mouth cracked into a gummy smile. "Aha! Him. I know the one. Pretty, isn't he?" 4. 4? Room 4. He visits the people who live in room 4. She spat a brownish phlegm, wiped her mouth with her hand. "Visits? He doesn't visit, he rents room 4. "What?" I flinched. "He lives here? In the tenement?" "You're surprised? You think he's too good for this place, do you? At least he pays on time, unlike your lot. Anyway, he's room 4. I'm sure you could slide his button under his door." With that, she went. Room 4? How long had he lived there? How come I hadn't seen him before? I couldn't believe it. The family called Jondrette lived in room 5, next door. I began to go back upstairs, but then a thought struck me. I rushed back, knocked on Madame Bourgon's door a second time. She was annoyed. What now? His name, madame. Do you know his name? She sighed, fed up. Marius. Marius Pontmercy. I smiled as I left her. It's a myth, Montparnasse had said. No, I thought. It's real. I knew that now. Marius. I couldn't knock on his door, because what would I say? What would he think of my torn skirts and my knotted hair? I'll wait, I thought. I'll just wait and hope I might see him again. But this was impossible to do. I was sent out to thieve every day. If I stayed behind, Maman would yell, "What are you doing? Get out! Find things! Shoo!" Or Papa would raise his fist and call me a lazy beast. At night, even though I listened very hard for the sound of his key in the door of room 4, I never did. There were too many other noises, barking dogs and crying babies and slamming doors, Papa's snores, Maman's curses about our poor thieving. I'd think, I hope he can't hear her through the walls. Slowly, the dirtied snow melted away. In its place I saw the first small shoots of green. My hands aren't numb anymore, said Azelma one day, amazed. She'd returned from her wanderings with coins and tobacco and a bottle of gin for Maman. How nice it's spring now. February, then March, April came. I just imagined him. He isn't real, stupid Eponine. But I knew he was real. Every time I went up or downstairs, I'd practice what I might say to him. A little comment on the weather or a belated Happy New Year, and each time I heard someone else's footsteps, I'd think, this time. I did see him in the end, but it wasn't on the stairs. It was early in the morning. Sun came through our grimy window, so I dressed and crept out of the tenement before anyone else was awake. I found a water trough meant for horses. It was freshly filled, and the water was clear, ungreened. I plunged my hands into it and washed myself, face, feet, between my legs, and under my arms. I also washed my hair and threw it back so that it sent a spray of water out, and a passing woman shouted, "Oi, stop that, I'm soaked now." But it felt good to get the winter's dirt off me. I wandered back home wondering how long it would take for my hair to dry in the weak sunshine. For once, I wasn't thinking about him. Then, at the crossroads by the tenement, I looked up. My heart leapt. It's him! It had been months since I'd seen him, but I still recognised his coat and his thick hair, and I didn't care that my dress was sticking to me. I'm going to follow him, I thought. I'll see where he goes and what he does. I knew how I looked, scruffy with scabs on my knees. I knew he wouldn't want to know me at all, but at least by watching him, I could get to know him. He walked through the streets of Salpêtrière, and I followed. My heart was racing, but I was smiling too, because I was happy just to see him again. I made notes in my head. He is tall, taller than me, but not so tall that he had to duck under doorways. His shoulders are broad, like he'd worked hard in his youth and still had the strength. His skin is unlined. I thought I heard him humming as he went. He walked steadily, like he had a purpose. I thought maybe he was going to the Rue de Rivoli, but he didn't go across the river. He walked east, away from the city. I'd never gone this way before, and I saw that the street became earthy and some hedges appeared. It was a strange place, neither city nor countryside. It was called Austerlitz. What's he doing out here? We'd been walking for perhaps an hour when he stopped. I slipped into the shadow of a hazelnut tree. There was a cottage. It was a small, ramshackle place, and yet its garden was overgrowing with spring flowers. It had a pear tree and a lavender bush. There were flowers of such a deep, soft red that I wanted to reach out and touch them. Marius was smiling, looking at it all. It had been ages since I'd seen a garden. I thought, it's like Montfermeil with its wayside flowers. Then he opened the gate and walked through it, calling out, "Monsieur Mabeuf, are you there?" I imagined him calling my name like that one day. "Eponine, where are you?" I liked thinking it. Marius came to this cottage a lot. On this first occasion, when my hair was still wet from the drinking trough, he stayed with a man called Mabeuf for an hour or more. Mabeuf was old, whiskery and hunched. His uncle? A relative? I didn't know. But they strolled slowly through the garden like friends, and I saw Mabeuf pointing at the flowers and the blossoms in his trees. Later they shook hands, and I followed Marius home. Now I knew he woke early, I began to do the same. While Maman and Papa and Azelma were still snoring, I crept out to follow him. And I was a fine follower. After all, I knew how to be quiet and stealthy. I could creep like a mouse so he'd never know I was there. Once he bought a flask of milk from the dairy on Rue Mustaphe and took it to Austerlitz as a gift. Another time, I moved the branches of the hazelnut tree aside and watched them sitting in the sunshine side by side, looking happy. And no matter what the weather was, they always trod around the garden. Marius would smell the dark red flowers or touch the lavender. He didn't even really know I existed, and yet I already knew what his footsteps sounded like and what his shadow looked like as it passed beneath our door, and I knew how he tilted his head up when he looked at something beautiful, a flying bird or the French flag blowing in the wind. I followed him into the city sometimes, and if he stopped to listen to a speaker in the crowd, fiery talk of God or the king or a brave soul who cried, "Get rid of the guillotine, it is bloody and unjust," I'd watch him. He bit his bottom lip when he was thinking. A little crease appeared between his eyes. I learned that he liked Les Halles, with its vendors crying out, "Monsieur, monsieur, fresh figs from Bercy," or "Honey from Avignon, monsieur." It was here that I saw a lady spill her figs to the floor. Marius kneeled and helped her, picking them up one by one. He's kind. He listens to people, and he thinks about things. I liked everything I learned about him. One day, he made his way along the Rue de la Chanvrerie. It led to the Place Michel. I gasped because he knew the Café Musain. Of all the cafes in Paris, he chose this one, the one where I'd pressed my nose against the glass in the winter months. That man with the blonde curls, and those men who'd raised their glasses in a toast, "To la marque, vive la République," must have been his friends, because they cheered as he entered the cafe. Through the window I saw him in there, drinking. His cheeks were flushed with warmth. My list grew longer and longer. He's got nice friends. He looks up at cathedrals as he walks past them. People cheer when he walks into a room. He's kind to an old man in Austerlitz. When he passes a stray dog, he always pats it. He's got dimples. When he's very tired, he rubs his knuckles into the corners of his eyes. If I was his, I'd take his hands and say, "Rest. I'll take care of you." Spring turned into summer. Paris had never looked more beautiful. I thought, Speak to him, Eponine. So I was brave, and I did. The visit. There were changes in me. I didn't know, but Maman saw them first. I'd come back from a day's walking with a smile, or I'd be singing, and this puzzled her. Why are you singing? Stop it, it's annoying. She saw me brushing the knots out of my hair with a thistle head and said, Vain, Eponine? You've not been that before. Maman noticed too that I was stealing less than I ever had. One day she looked up from her sewing and said, You're bringing back nothing these days. Nothing. What's wrong with you? Are you actually giving those letters to people? Those letters that Papa wrote so well? I shrugged. I didn't want to lie. Well, do it, for heaven's sake. Azelma's stealing well, so why can't you? The weather might be warmer, but we still need to eat. Maman returned to her sewing, tugged the needle fiercely. You seem distracted, and I don't like it, Eponine. Do you hear? Azelma was always stealing well. She returned with her pockets jangling, and our parents rubbed their hands and kissed her. She came back with all sorts of food, a haunch of goat or a basket of eggs. In late summer she rushed home and untied her bodice and skirts in the middle of the room, and dozens of plums fell down around her. See? I can steal anything, she laughed. The grocer didn't even notice. That night, with all the plums around us, I said, We've enough fruit to feed the whole of the Gorbeau if we want to. Which we don't, snapped Papa. Why would we want to share what's ours? With that wheezy couple in room 7 or that sour old church-going cripple who talks to himself in room 9? Or, said Maman, that snooty, well-dressed boy next door in room 4. I won't share a thing with him. I bet he's got money hidden away. Azelma swallowed. Really? Then maybe we should give him one of Papa's letters. Let's trick him too. Maman grinned, her mouth full of plums. A wonderful idea. Do it now, Azelma. Have you got a letter? I spoke up. Room 4? Let me, Maman. She flinched. You? Miss Goody Two-Shoes? I nodded. My stomach felt hard and my hands shook, but I said, Yes, I'll go. It's my turn after all. Papa spat out a plumstone. Don't mess it up. Do you hear? I went to the corner. I rinsed my face and washed my hands. I can do this. I can speak to him. I trembled. I didn't want to trick him, but at least I had a reason to speak to him now. My insides turned over and over. I picked up one of Papa's letters. I went out into the corridor and stood in front of his door. The number 4 looked back at me. I smoothed my hair and cleared my throat. Take a deep breath, I told myself. Be brave. I knocked 3 times. Bang, bang, bang. His voice. It called out, Come in, Madame Bourgon. I opened the door. It isn't Madame Bourgon, monsieur. There he was, sitting at a writing desk. He wore a dark blue shirt and woolen breeches, and his feet were in socks, without shoes. There were shadows under his eyes like he hadn't been sleeping. He wore the slight crease between his eyes that I knew. Oui, mademoiselle? Excuse me, monsieur. I live next door, in room 5. We met once, on the stairs. I ran into you and... I paused. Of course, he didn't remember, but I couldn't help feeling crushed. I've got a letter for you. I held it out. He kept looking at my face for a moment, and then he reached for the note.
I remember. Back in the winter, you were upset, I think, even though you said you were all right.
He did remember. I nodded.
Had someone hurt you?
Only with words. He gave a small smile.
Sometimes words can be the most hurtful things of all.
He opened the letter and started to read. His room was much better than ours. It was the same size, with a hearth in it, but he also had a bed with a proper coverlet and a desk with a matching chair and a mirror in a fine frame. What was the frame worth? I'd been raised to ask such things. And there was a piece of material at the window, a curtain. I'd not seen curtains since we'd left Montfermeil. There was a bookcase, too. Without thinking, I went to it. It had been years since I'd held or read a book. I pulled one off the shelf. Books! You have books! He looked up, surprised.
You read?
I used to. I know I don't look much, all rags and bones, but I learned to read when I was very small and I loved it. I read about Paris, and those books made me want to come here. Sometimes I'd read to my little brother. I paused. In a quieter voice I said, "It's been a long time since I read a book." What else could I tell him? I said, "I like walking too. I've walked and walked through Paris and seen so much." I couldn't stop suddenly, found myself babbling all my secrets, as if now that I'd started talking I might never stop. And how white Notre Dame looks at night and the grassy slopes of Champ du Mars and the boulevards. I've peeped into theatres, and I'd love to see a proper play, like ladies do. Maybe one day. Paris is so beautiful, monsieur. Before I came here, I used to sleep in ditches or under an upturned boat. Yes, I know how that sounds, but it wasn't so bad. We could swim and catch fish there. I think there is beauty in most things, if you look for it, don't you? Even the dirtiest things can be lovely underneath. I knew a man who said that the speckled peaches were the sweetest of all, and I like that. There can be light in dark places, don't you think, Monsieur Marius? I'd said too much. But it was hard to be calm, and my head and heart were racing. He stared at me. He looked amused and puzzled.
You know my name?
I blushed. Oui. I heard Madame Bourgon say it. It was the truth.
Then I should know yours. It would be fair, wouldn't it?
I smiled. Eponine.
Eponine?
I was named after a heroine in one of Maman's books.
C'est un joli nom. And it sounds like you've had an interesting life, Eponine. Sleeping under boats?
I wasn't sure how to answer that. Marius lifted the letter.
Did you write this?
I winced. The letter. It's not my work. It's my father's. Please forgive me for giving it to you. It's full of lies and I didn't want to give it to you, but I've got no real choice in it. My mother's crippled. My father is... well, he ordered me to give you this and I can't disobey him. We're penniless, you see.
Many are.
He looked out of the window.
If the souls who died 40 years ago in that revolution could see us now.
Then he looked back to me.
Aren't there better ways of trying to get a sou or two?
I felt so ashamed. All my talk of books and beauty suddenly seemed very foolish. I'm a grubby thief, that's all. There are, and I do try, but it's hard to get a job when you're someone like me. He folded the letter and handed it back.
Well, you've been honest enough in explaining the note to me. And Eponine, I know how poor you are. I've seen your family on the stairs and I've caught your sister dipping her hands in my coat pocket."
He opened a drawer in his desk and offered me a 5-franc coin. I gasped. 5 francs? That was more money than I'd stolen in months and months. My parents would be so happy if I handed it to them, but I shook my head. "I can't take that. It feels wrong."
"Why? You aren't stealing it. I'm offering it willingly."
I suddenly felt very sad. I didn't want his pity. I wanted something else. Pity was the last thing I wanted. "But monsieur, it's your money."
"And so I can choose to spend it how I like. Take it. You need it more than I do. Have you seen how thin you are? How unwell you look?"
My shame was greater than ever then. The word unwell meant ugly. Thin meant boyish, and not like a girl at all. In all my dreams, he told me I was beautiful, but those were just stupid dreams. I could barely speak to him. I reached for the coin.
"Buy food with it."
"Thank you," I murmured, and I hurried from his room with tears in my eyes. The others cooed over the 5 francs. Maman stroked me and smiled.
"He must be a proper fool, that boy," said Papa. "Good to know."
But I thought, no, he isn't a fool. He wasn't tricked. He was kind, that's all. And I comforted myself by thinking that a little food and summer sun might make me look much better, and maybe he'd meet me out in the street and say, "Goodness, how you've changed, Eponine. You don't look unwell anymore." I looked back at each word he'd said to me. "C'est un joli nom." Did that have meaning in it? I stared at the wall between us that night. I imagined what he might be doing at that moment, sitting at his desk, or drawing the curtains, or taking off his shoes and lying down on that coverlet. Might he be looking at his books, thinking, "Eponine has touched these"? Briefly I pretended. It was a nice daydream to have. But I knew the truth. I looked thin and unwell, with bruises and hollow cheeks. Of course he wasn't thinking of me. A walk at sunset. The 5 francs lasted a while. It bought meat, cheese, a new darning needle, and tobacco for Papa's pipe. It bought me freedom too, because I could follow Marius without having to give out letters or steal. June bloomed all around us. In Montfermeil, this had been the month of hawthorn blossom and the early roses climbing over the churchyard wall. In Paris, there were fewer flowers, just some weeds in the Rue des Gobelins and roses in gents' buttonholes, but it was enough. That was a hot June too. Maman fanned herself in our room, saying, "There's no air, and the smell. What's that horrible smell?" The heat meant that everything, rubbish, milk, human muck, the offal by the butcher's doors, rotted far more quickly. A stench seemed to rise from the river as well. Some people walked with handkerchiefs held over their noses, or with posies in their hand. Marius was the one good thing in my life. I wanted to talk to him again. I'd left room 4 feeling tearful and ashamed, but as the days passed, I could only think of the best parts of my time with him. His concern for me. Had someone hurt you? And how quickly he had forgiven me for the note. One hot day, I followed him again. In the summer heat, he moved more slowly. He moved from the shade of a house to the shade of a church, or he'd pause beneath a bridge for a while. He carried a bag with him, books, I suspected, an inkwell and quill. I followed him to the Café Musin in the Place Michel, where he sat outside with his friends. They read his books and papers, drank and wrote and talked beneath the shade of a tree. I nestled against the stones of a nearby church, the one with the clock that chimed on the hour, and watched how he drank and how he moved his hand through his hair. They talked with gestures and loud voices. I recognised some of his friends, the boy with half-moon spectacles who shouted through cupped hands, and the boy with golden curls who stood, thumped the table, said, "Yes, that's it." Their passion hadn't changed. I watched for a long time. In the end, my legs cramped, so I stood and turned to go, but then I heard my name called out. "Eponine?" I felt my heart leap. "Eponine, is that you?" Marius was walking towards me. He'd risen from his chair, put his bag across his shoulder, and was making his way across the square. "I thought it was you. What are you doing all the way out here? You're a long way from the Gorbeau." I couldn't say, "following you." I could barely speak at all. I just shrugged and tried to look like my heart wasn't beating faster and my hands weren't shaking. "Just walking. You know I like walking." "Ah," he smiled. "Of course. Walking all round Paris. Well, I'm heading back home now. Would you walk with me? For a while at least?" So we began to walk through the streets, Marius and me. We walked slowly, side by side, moving round the dirt in the streets and stepping over potholes. In my head, I told myself, "Speak to him. Ask him things." "Are you often at the Café Musin, Monsieur Marius?" He smiled. "We're neighbours, aren't we? Just call me Marius, or else I will need to call you Mademoiselle Eponine, which all sounds a bit too formal, don't you think?" I blushed. "Yes, I go there often," he went on. "My friends meet there, friends from my student days. They are—" he considered which word to use. "Fiery. Full of ideas and passion. Patriotic, of course." "Are you?" "Patriotic? Yes, I am. France deserves far better than all this fighting and disease and unfairness. Its people deserve more." "You support the man called Lamarck?" He looked across at me, wide-eyed. "I do. You do too?" I didn't want to lie to him. To be honest, I don't know too much about politics and kings. I've just heard people talking of Lamarck, that's all. I've never been to school. I'm not sure I'm very clever. He laughed. "Oh, I don't believe that. You read books, don't you? You were so taken with my bookcase, I remember. There are people who've been to university who aren't readers of books at all, Eponine. People who say they're clever and well-read, but in fact they're not. They're just rich. Don't assume you're worth less than them. I imagine you're smarter than most." I smiled. He thinks I'm smart. We walked across the Seine. We paused on the bridge, looked at the sunlight on the water and how the sky was turning gold and pink. "And your life, until now? Tell me about it. It sounds like a curious thing." It had been curious, I supposed. Perhaps. We left our town 6 years ago. We were... Should I tell him? Yes, I decided. I would always speak truthfully to him. Running from the law. My father committed a crime, so he hid. "For 6 years?" He seemed amazed. "Yes. It was hard, that's true. But I got to see some beautiful things, like full moons and frosty mornings. Briefly, I thought of Gavroche. I shrugged. It could have been worse.
And it could have been better, too, I think. You're generous with your words.
Generous? I'd never been called that before. Smart and generous. I beamed. And you? Your life? He looked down at the river.
What can I tell you? My parents have died. No brothers or sisters. I see my friends as my family, and I love them just as much. I love my country, too. I love Paris.